And in fact, we're not fundamentally rail travellers, but we do have some decent city rail networks.
Yeah.
Our national patronage is probably only about 20%, I think, of what the UK's is. The journey to work mode share did peak at about 15% before COVID. It's a little less than that now, but we're finding that there's increased weekend travel, for example. In freight, only, look, it's a shameful thing, but only about 2% of goods between Sydney and Melbourne goes by rail.
Yeah.
That is intermodal freight. It is better east-west. The longer distances, I forget, it's quite impressive. It's certainly above 50% over there. But there's a lot of potential for growth. We have 23,000 level crossings across the country, and only 21% of those have active protection. So
Yeah.
that is, that's a lot.
That's very much a big capital B bad on the network. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it is. 23, I mean, there's a lot of land, but gee.
Yeah.
Point-to-point times by rail are usually slower than by road, almost always. Just 11% of our track is electrified. 87% of our track distance is just single track.
Yeah.
And we have the mix of gauges. So we have 8% of it is broad gauge, 36% is standard gauge, and 56% is narrow gauge. So there's a lot there that are challenges. But to take a leaf from one of your very much earlier episodes, Australian railways can be good, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
I believe that we have more rail route per capita than any other country in the world. So we have 31,000 kilometres for a 27 million population. And I'd love for somebody to check me on this, but I believe that puts us ahead of Canada, who would be second.
Yeah.
And I don't believe there's any other country. So each of us has, I don't know, what's that? A metre or something of track.
Each. Yeah.
Each, but that's more than anywhere else in the world. So that is even with the network shrinkage we saw in that map before. More freight goes by rail than all other modes combined. A lot of that is the bulk extractive stuff.
Yes. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to put our face back up to show you that there is a graph that you have that shows something that I put up a second ago, but actually we wanted to highlight this particularly because it is interesting and it talks about the story and the good news story actually that you're highlighting. Yeah.
And a lot of that is because of those new railways up in the Pilbara in the northwest, which are the iron ore railways, and there are the world's longest and heaviest trains run there. I think there's the world record according to the Guinness Book of Records, 7.3 kilometres long for a train. I can't even imagine that, and 99,000 tonnes. So that is,
That's mind-boggling scale, and for better or worse, it's certainly when it's ore is like critical support. Of course, the coal trains are less. Ideally, those wouldn't exist. But this graph that you put up showed the growth in freight volumes by mode. Like, yes, there is growth in road, frustrating growth in road. And what is that? 50% growth. Well, not even that, 25-30% growth. But the rail growth is enormous. It's 150 to 450. So that's a nearly 300% growth. That's an enormous growth. And as you say, a lot of that up in the northeast.
Northwest.
Sorry, the northwest. Yes, the northwest of Oz. But yeah, there's this growth, and this kind of brings me to a point, Kristen, I wanted to kind of round off on as we close, which is people might be surprised to know that these two countries sit next to each other in the top 20. That's Australia and Japan. Now, Japan often gets talked about as having the world's best railways, but of course that's not true. It's not even necessarily true if you just look at passengers, but they have a very, very good passenger railway system and an almost non-existent freight rail system. And Australia kind of, we've talked about the successes of the passenger railway, but in terms of volumes and mode share, Australia kind of has the opposite, which is that it has an almost non-existent passenger rail sector from a mode share perspective. That's not the complete story. But from a freight perspective, the mode share overall, and that graph that you just put up explains why. It's massive. And so these are extremely unbalanced systems. In fact, if I jump to the data, I describe these as grossly imbalanced, but they sit at numbers 6 and 7. Japan at number 6 and Australia number 7 as two systems with greatly opposing types of system, and yet the two countries are next to each other. So Australia, it is not, it sits way above most of Europe, sits way above the US and the UK in terms of the effectiveness of its railway system. So if you had investment in improving the passenger railway system, to really pull up those numbers of the passenger railway system, and you'd actually get to the point where you have an extremely good railway system.